I'd learned some things in conservatory about like John Cage and being able to use radio or use silence or use, prepared piano or anything. And I didn't have although I was a trained musician, I didn't have the skills to become a composer that writes scores and stuff like that. That wasn't what I could do. But I knew there were other options, and what I wanted to do was screw around, and try things. And so I got a bunch of old tape and some old used tape decks at a junk store in 1978 in San Francisco, and started making tape loops and trying things and recording everything. The sounds of San Francisco, the ambient sounds were fantastic. And, I was recording everything. We had this old refrigerator that put a mic in the fridge compressors. Man, you record that on high speed, slow it down. I'm giving away all my secrets here. There's so much frequency range and really cool drone shit in there. So Jamie, my partner for years, who I met in '78, moved to San Francisco to be with, was a musicologist. He was a huge record collector, an artist. He loved music. He worked at record stores. He had everything you wanted at the time, whatever was the coolest stuff. He was a geek, His friends were artists too, and they also were record collectors. So they were painting, and I was painting with sound. And then when we moved to New York, I was trying to create something from nothing, grabbing sounds out of the airwaves, because we had this big loft. We had wires going all around for the speakers and things, and you could pick up the most powerful station in New York was, I think it was called WCBS or something, Muzak, basically American Popular Standards, with all the, syncopation and everything taken out, and no vocals or anything, just 1,001 strings and some oohs and ahs and maybe a little percussion every now and then. But I loved strings. I wanted a mellotron. I couldn't afford a mellotron. It was a famous instrument the Beatles used, and a lot of other people then used, very expensive, running tape loops, So I thought, well, I'm going to try to make a mellotron. And I would record little snippets of Muzak when the stringy parts, because I loved strings, so I wanted to grab some of that. So I'd make some loops and record them on the high speed, and then I'd slow them down and see what happens. And well, it was like looking in a microscope, and you have this anesthesia music, and then you dial in on it, and it's deep well of melancholy, which totally resonated with me. So this is where I got my start. So, then I eventually was able to get some synthesizers and things. And so I built up a huge library back then when I was very prolific of my loops, which I still use, and I make more. And so this is where it sort of came from. The piece I performed today was On Time, Out of Time. With this piece, I met these scientists 2017 in LA at Caltech. My friends Evelina Domnich and Dmitry Gelfand, brilliant art scientists. They were doing a lecture, I was there, and the LIGO scientists were there. LIGO is the Laser Interferometer Gravitational Wave Observatory. This installation they built, took years for them to build in North America, and they'd been looking to try to track gravitational waves coming through the Earth. They caught sounds of two massive black holes colliding like, I don't know the details, but something like 3 billion light years ago. which created such a massive amount of energy, it created a rift in space-time. And that traveled throughout galaxies, and then eventually went through the Earth and moved on. And that's what they captured. Well, I met a couple of these guys at the lecture at the cocktails afterwards, and they were fans of mine, and they're like, oh, we have these recordings, they're really weird, would you like to do anything with them? And I was like, yeah, send them over, baby. The way memories change, or the way they disintegrate, or the way the mind works, you know. That was quite an experience to have that happen with these 20-year-old loops in the studio, just trying to, and these were loops that I didn't even remember because they were so perfect. At the time, I didn't know if I could actually call them my work. I knew they were perfect. I knew they didn't need anything, but they got set aside because I wanted to mix live. So they would stay on the side. And then eventually we moved to another place, and then I got a huge, real studio set up with synthesizers, and then eventually when digital technology came in, I knew I'm gonna have to digitize these things because they will decay, because the tapes were old when I started making them, and I knew what could happen. But I didn't know it was gonna happen, but it did, and I knew it was happening, and by then I knew enough to know pretty soon, stay out of the way, make sure your levels are good, and let's just see what happens. This is sick. So there's that. And then a profound, like, oh my God, what just happened? Life and death of these melodies, and this is really something. My friend Howard Schwartzberg, this fabulous artist from Coney Island, grew up in Coney Island. Billy! He went to art school. He knew about French deconstructionism and all this kind of crap. This is it. You've done it. And he was right. I always tell that story. I always tell the same damn stories. But anyway, I'm sure you've read this a million times.